My name is Karim, and I'm a philosopher here at the philosophy department. And my area of research is ethics and technology, applied ethics, and in particular ethics that have to do with the future of humanity and how we may be affected by these changes in technology that we can see unfolding. And among the major impacts that this technology may have is what we refer to as existential risks. And this is what I'm going to talk about. Just how I'm going to outlay this lecture. First some definitions, then I'm going to talk about or try to assess the badness of humanity going extinct, and talk about Nick Bostrom's article. Then I'm going to talk about the Doomsday Argument. Maybe you heard about it. I'm going to comment on it and why it's inconclusive. I'm going to mention the Fermi paradox. Maybe you also heard about it, and I'm going to say something about why it's not a paradox, but still interesting. Then I'm going to describe 3 existential threats, the ones I deem most likely, in order of likeliness, with the most unlikely on top and going down here. And I'm going to try to end on a more upbeat point about mitigation efforts. And there I'm going to mention Julian Savulescu and Ingmar Persson's article on moral enhancement. And then 2 of my favorite topics, space colonization and the uplifting of non-human animals. Okay, any questions about the outline? Okay, so let's start. We have a lot of ground to cover. So okay, what definitions? What is an existential threat, or what is an existential catastrophe? Well, you can catastrophe is a disaster that permanently and drastically reduces the potential for Earth-originating intelligence. An event that drastically and permanently reduces the potential of Earth-originating intelligence. Note that I didn't say the end of mankind, because of course, over the turn of the millions of years that will pass, if nothing bad happens, mankind will naturally go extinct and will be replaced by some other species, if evolution is granted to take its course. But of course, this is not necessarily bad. This is not an existential catastrophe. However, an impact with a 10-kilometer asteroid would be such a disaster. It will not, an event that would replace us with an artificial intelligence or with another intelligent life form would not be an existential threat on this definition either. So I'm talking about an event that really messes things up. We can also talk about risk, but I'm not going to talk so much about it. But risk is basically the probability that this event will happen. Okay. So, how bad would this be? Well, of course, it depends on the normative theory that you adopt, on the idea about goodness or badness that you ascribe to. Many philosophers and some people think that utilitarianism is an idea that is fairly plausible. Although I myself disagree with utilitarianism, I think it may capture a significant part of what most of us think is good. Utilitarianism claims that happiness is good, and an outcome is better the more happiness this outcome contains. So if there's 1 billion happy people in the world in the year 2050, that's good. But if there are 10 billions, that's even better. So according to utilitarianism, and according to some assumptions about how the future may unfold, if we would not have an existential disaster, we may have very strong reasons to avoid this kind of catastrophe, perhaps stronger than what we normally are inclined to believe. And this has to do with the potential of there existing many, many people in the future if disaster is avoided. Assume that mankind does never perish and we continue colonize the solar system, a large chunk of our galaxy, perhaps neighboring galaxies, over the course of the billions and trillions of years. We know that new star formation will cease in 10 to the 15 years. That's a lot of time, and in that time we will be able to travel very far. We don't know exactly how many people may live during this time. According to some conservative estimates, there might be as many as 10 to the power of 30 people. Okay, of course there's a great margin of error here. We shouldn't take this number literally, but in any case, it's a huge amount of people. If you ascribe to utilitarianism, this is a pretty big number. If we were to go extinct tomorrow, this is a lot of people that would never experience any happiness. And this is very problematic. So according to this view, we should not only, think about existential risks as some kind of hobby or some kind of, oh, it's so fun, oh, it's scary, and so on. We should really think about these 10 to the 30 people who will never see any star whatsoever. So that's what Nick Bostrom argues in his article, Astronomical Waste. However, of course, this total version of utilitarianism is very controversial. And not everyone agrees that we should account for the value of people who don't exist. I mean, these people, they are not around. They're not even real people. They're just potential people. And is it really reasonable to take them into consideration? Many people would dispute that. Instead, we should just take into account people who are actual, you guys and myself. We are actual people, and we are the only ones who matter. Then again, Bostrom argues that some of us may live for a very long time if disaster is avoided. Perhaps all of you, or at least the majority, will live so long into the future that technology will allow you to live perhaps perpetually, perhaps for billions or trillions of years. So if we only consider the welfare of people now existing and make the assumption that there's a slight possibility that even a few % of us may live a few quadrillions of years, then that amounts also to a lot of happiness, assuming that these quadrillions of years are nice years. But I mean, if we have the technology to make us live that long, I don't see why they wouldn't be nice. Okay, so even if we only care about the people who are living today, we have strong reasons, perhaps stronger than what we previously thought, to mitigate disaster. How likely is it? Well, we never experience an existential disaster, and this may lead us to the conclusion that it's fairly unlikely, right? An event that has never happened, perhaps will never happen. But of course, this argument or this line of reasoning is so-called biased by observer. There's an observer bias here. Of course, if there had been an existential disaster, there would be no observer to conclude that existential disasters are perhaps more likely than we should expect. So we cannot infer that there has been no existential disasters. From that, we cannot deduce that they are unlikely. However, there's another argument who says that they are very likely, and this is called the Doomsday Argument. And I think it's a fun argument because it's a very witty argument. I'm going to tell you about it. So imagine we have two urns. Well, this is an urn, and they're identical. Or no, hold on. We have one urn, and you have to guess how many. How do you say spelkula? Marbles. How many marbles are in this urn? And I'm further telling you that every marble is numbered from number 1 to 10, and then there are two alternatives. One alternative is 10, and the other is 10 to the power of 6. and you cannot look inside the pot. So since you can't look inside the pot, you're completely agnostic, right? There's no way to know whether it's A or B. So if you have a probability function here between A and B, it's reasonable to just be completely agnostic. You're in the middle. Now assume that you can put your hand in the urn and pick up one marble. Okay, you pick one marble and it says 7, number 7. So how are you to adjust your probability function given this new information? Any suggestions? Does it make it more likely that this is A or that it is the outcome B? Well, according to the Doomsday Argument, we should adjust our probability function towards A. Why? Because if you pick out number 7, the probability that you will pick out number 7, if A is there, if there are only 10, it's 1 in 10, right? But the probability you pick out 7 in 10 to the power of 6 is 1 in 10 to the power of 6, right? So even though it's still possible that this is urn B and not A, you should move your probability function to the left. Okay, so imagine that you are a marble and you ask yourselves, is the world going to end soon? So imagine that you are the random sample. You look at your number and you notice that there have been actually roughly 10 billion people living on Earth. So your number is roughly 100 billion. So your number is 100 billion. But if Bostrom is correct, and there will be 10 to the 30 people throughout the history of mankind, it is very unlikely, since your number is so low, it seems very unlikely there will be 10 to the 30 people, right? Since your number is so low, it seems more likely that the outcome will be closer to this lower number rather than to this higher number. And from the Doomsday Argument, then you should infer that the Doomsday is very close, and that you are in fact one of the last people alive. Now, this argument is deeply flawed, but I'm not going to tell you how or why. I'm going to let you think about it. You can rewatch this video and check it on Wikipedia if you really want to know. So let's move on to the Fermi paradox. Enrico Fermi was a brilliant not physician, physicist, and he postulated this paradox, but it's not really a paradox, it's more of a question that needs to be explained. And the question is, where are they? We know that there are millions and billions of stars in this galaxy, and we know that in other galaxies there are even more stars. We know that there could be many trillions of planets. And we also know, although Fermi didn't know this, that planet formation is fairly common. And we also know that life forms can thrive on very hostile climates, on very hostile environments. So all this points to the probability of life existing on other planets being fairly high. There are some observations that we have made which may lead us to this conclusion. So Fermi's question is, if there are so many stars, and if planets seem abundant, and life forms seem to thrive on very different kinds of climates, how come we have never been contacted by an alien civilization? Or how come we don't observe any megastructures on other parts of the universe? Well, the reason this is not a paradox is because there are some fairly plausible explanations for this. One of them is that perhaps it is very unlikely that life will emerge on a planet. right? We have one Earth-like planet, and life emerged on that planet. But again, because of this observation selection effect, we cannot infer that this means it's common. We might even be the only planet in the whole universe who has life. So there's a possibility that Earth is a very rare phenomenon. That's number one. Number two is that actually, even if there are a lot of planets and stars, distances are huge. And that the light from distant galaxies that would give us information about megastructures or so on has just not arrived to us. But a third explanation could be that there's something in intelligent life, there's some filter, there's something that impedes intelligent life from reaching the stars. There may be something about inherently unstable about a civilization entering into its space age before it reaches this mature stage where we colonize entire star systems. There may be some kind of technology or something, some kind of technology or some kind of turn of events that makes it very unlikely that we will reach the stars and proliferate outside of our own cradle. So the Fermi paradox, although not a paradox, points in the same direction as the Doomsday Argument. And even if it's not as conclusive, it may give us pause to think about the risks. So which threats or risks am I talking about? Well, we can basically make a distinction between natural risks, nature, and anthropogenic risks. Risks from nature are collisions with asteroids, supervolcanism, naturally occurring pandemics, and so on. These are all important, significant, but I think that they have the acuteness of these risks has been pushed back by technology. Pandemics are certainly still a threat, but we have mitigation strategies for them, and hypervolcanism, that is the occurrence of many volcanoes that can kind of disturb the climate, are also a problem, but they are unlikely to kill us off in one stroke. Asteroids are certainly a problem, a threat, and also illustrated in many science fiction movies. But there is an asteroid surveillance project called Space Guard, named after Arthur C. Clarke's Space Guard in the book Encounter with Rama. And it doesn't seem to be any big asteroids in the vicinity. So we're unlikely to collide with a mankind killer asteroid. Of course, there are still threats from particular asteroids. A 2 kilometer diameter asteroid is not fun. It will eradicate a small country like Sweden. So it's certainly a threat, but it's not a threat to mankind. So nature, of course, is dangerous, but I'll set it aside. Anthropogenic threats are different. They're different because they depend very much on our own choices and our own technologies. And history has taught us that the choices and the technologies we develop are very difficult to assess, are very difficult to assess and to prepare for. So even if I've listed 3 here, the main worry is that there's going to pop up something completely unforeseen, or one of these in a completely unforeseen way, and that these threats are going to cause serious harm. Okay, so let me start talking about artificial intelligence and the singularity. Let me start with some definitions. The singularity, perhaps you heard the word, Ray Kurzweil is a guy who talks about the singularity. The singularity is an event such as it will Well, it's an event that is singular in nature and that makes predictions about the future after this event practically impossible. The development of artificial intelligence with a recursive self-improvement mechanism may be such an event. The idea is that if we design an artificial intelligence, and an artificial intelligence is here defined as a program with a general intelligence that surpasses any person now living. If we design such a system, it will in theory be able to do many things that people can do just better. Among the things that people can do is to program artificial intelligences. If we create such an intelligence, it will be able to improve on its own code and recursively self-improve itself, perhaps very fast, until it reaches a stage when it is hyper-intelligent, far surpassing any current person. Such an intelligence could, just in the movie The Terminator, kill us all, but much, much faster than the Terminator. We should not underestimate the power of intelligence. We are just slightly smarter than chimps, yet we could easily destroy all chimps if we wanted to. An artificial intelligence may be much, much smarter than we are. Perhaps relate to us as we relate to lizards or I don't know, words. With this intelligence, it's difficult just to assess what this kind of intelligence might do if hostile. So, will it be hostile? We don't know. But on the other hand, it's unlikely that it will be friendly. Imagine that this is the logical space of all motivational structures that an artificial intelligence might have. Imagine that the friendly artificial intelligence are around here and the hostiles are here. Okay, it's unlikely that if we just randomly assemble an artificial intelligence without thinking about the motivational structure, that will hit this point. It's also, of course, unlikely that we'll hit this point unless we, say, design an artificial intelligence for the purpose of warfare. Well, yeah, that's also a big problem. That's not unlikely that well, there's a lot of research effort in designing artificial intelligence for the purpose of warfare. But it's perhaps more likely that the artificial intelligence may inhabit somewhere in between, just be completely oblivious to people, or have priorities that don't involve people at all. Perhaps we have an artificial intelligence who sees it as its supreme goal to make cheesecake. And then it'll just go on making cheesecakes and you know, transforming all matter in the universe into cheesecakes. And of course this is a bad thing, because even if you might like cheesecake, you don't want to be a cheesecake. So yeah, so that's a problem. Finally, just about artificial intelligences, is that we should not think that we can easily contain an artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence, of course, we could put an artificial intelligence inside a black box and limit and eliminate all interactions with it. Then you would have a contained artificial intelligence. The problem is that this artificial intelligence would be no good. You could not use it to mitigate other threats or improve the condition of mankind in general. Only if you interact with an artificial intelligence will you be able to benefit from its intelligence or computing power or whatever. But as soon as you allow any degree of interaction, you will in fact be played by this artificial intelligence. It's like, if it's almost like if you're talking to some kind of god or something, you cannot just, you know, control it. Either you lock it in completely or you let it loose. I think, even though I think a lot about this possibility, I think it's quite unlikely. I think nuclear holocaust is unfortunately far more likely. And even though the threat is not as critical as it used to be, there are still many nuclear weapons in the world's arsenals. We have, and even if the intercontinental ballistic missiles have been dismantled, the fissile material is still there and can easily be reassembled. Over the course of 100 or 200 years, politics may develop in completely unforeseen ways, and the nuclear rearmament could be done fairly quickly. Moreover, historically there has been only two superpowers with enough economic clout and industrial capability of producing large amounts of nuclear weapons. Now there are many countries who have this possibility. If there would be a political shift over the 50 coming years or so on, many countries would be able to arm themselves with vast amounts of nuclear weapons. Of course, you already know why nuclear weapons are so dangerous. Thermonuclear warheads can easily destroy a city. The missiles that are operational now are far more destructive than the Hiroshima bomb. The Hiroshima bomb was like it was like a fart in the ocean, so to speak, compared with the hydrogen bombs that are now possible. Especially hydrogen bombs that divide themselves in space. If you launch a missile, the missile separates into 8 different missiles and rains down over a populated area, possibly killing many more people than a singular warhead could ever. There's also the risk of firestorms. Nowadays, in the large urban areas that we now have, there's a lot of material that is combustible. This is what happened in Dresden during the bombings. We realized that if you bomb a city with enough fire, the fire will start feeding upon itself. It creates a firestorm effect. So the fire sucks in oxygen from the surrounding landscape and creates a wall of fire that runs through a city and completely obliterates it. Nuclear bombs in today's mega cities will most likely create this effect, making anyone who did not die from the initial blast very likely to die in burns. Of course, then we have the nuclear winter effects. These are now debated. We're not sure if there could actually be a nuclear winter, so it's more disputed. We have learned more about the climate now than we had until the 80s, but there is still the major risk of nuclear fallout. Given a big enough nuclear war, survivors may be poisoned by radiation, making them infertile. And this is, well, of course there's cancer also, but infertility may be, for the continued existence of mankind, a bigger risk. Because if we are infertile, and everyone is infertile, even the people who took haven in nuclear shelters will die out within 1 or 2 generations after the nuclear war. So a nuclear holocaust is definitely worth thinking about. Okay, I'm going to speed up. Finally, it's maybe my favorite topic, bioengineered infectious agents. Why I say bioengineered and not natural pandemics is because natural pandemics are rarely either that contagious or that virulent. There seems to be an evolutionary trade-off between epidemiologically effective agents and virulent agents. So the more harm an infectious agent does to our body, I mean the more likely it is to kill us, the more likely it is for us to be home and not walk around spreading our germs. If a disease is relatively harmless, we're likely to spread it a lot. That's why probably all of us in this room has strains of the common cold, but probably none of us has Ebola. harmless agents are very common. However, if we bioengineer these nasty little things, we could combine the bad effects of virulence with contagion. In the Soviet Union, you know about smallpox, of course, the global pandemic that was eradicated in the end of the 1970s, had a very high virulence, killed 1/3 of people infected, and with a very high, very epidemiologically efficient. Fortunately, there was a vaccine. You could easily vaccinate people, and so it was eradicated. However, the Soviet Union developed a strain of smallpox in their military laboratories during the 80s that was 100% deadly, and that was immune to most vaccines. Recently, a couple of researchers have experimented by mistake a cousin of smallpox, mousepox, smallpox that affects mice and rabbits, that also was 100% deadly and resistant to any vaccine. Incubation time for smallpox is 1 week. In the 18th century, it meant that it couldn't spread that fast. It spread pretty fast. But today, in a crowded airport, you can easily spread smallpox to a lot of people in 1 week, if you're determined enough. By natural means, it's unlikely to reach a lot of people, but if you have a smallpox strain and really want to kill off as many people as possible, and especially if you have this smallpox plus, you're likely to be a very serious threat to mankind. Another of mankind's kind of most detested foes, the bacterium Yersinia pestis, who caused the Black Death in Europe and Asia during the Middle Ages and the Renaissance. It's of course a bacterium and can be defeated by strong doses of antibiotics. However, we know today that there are some strains of bacterium that are resistant to antibiotics. Yersinia pestis is not likely to become resistant to antibiotics just like that, because it's not widespread in the human population. There is some Yersinia pestis in mice and rodents in southwestern United States. However, with rudimentary laboratory equipment, you could take a strain of Yersinia pestis and make it resistant to antibiotics by simply feeding it small doses of it. Yersinia pestis, especially when infecting people in the lung form, pneumonic form, pneumonic plague, is highly contagious. If I had Yersinia pestis or the pneumonic plague, now you would be all infected. And it also has a 100% virulence. When it comes to smallpox, it has been eradicated, which is good. And also I think the strains of the US Soviet military has been destroyed. However, since smallpox is a virus, it's fairly easy to construct a virus from pure chemicals if you have a modern lab. Two researchers in the US constructed polio from chemicals that you can buy from just normal companies by mail. The information about how to construct smallpox is readily available in public databases. They made polio. Polio is a more sophisticated and complicated virus than smallpox. So I'm afraid that bioengineered infectious agents pose the greatest threat of human extinction. So we have a few minutes left, and I want to be more optimistic now. So I'm going to talk about mitigation efforts. What can we do to avoid these things? As we said here, at least two and three in my list here are due to bad people who want to kill other people, so to speak. Perhaps artificial intelligence, that is a risk that can emerge from a mistake. Although you can easily conceive of someone less scrupulous thinking about, like, I'm going to make an artificial intelligence who's really bad, so it will be a great asset in war. So one option that Julian Savulescu and Ingmar Persson propose in their article is to morally enhance mankind, especially while thinking that we are right now pursuing many research efforts in order to cognitively enhance mankind. There are many research programs who aim to make us smarter. They think that we should make us more good instead, or at least make us more good before we get smarter. Among the things that they propose is a program of research in order to improve empathy, to make people less aggressive, perhaps less racist. These things, we don't have the technologies yet, although we are starting to get some understanding about how to do this. We know that the empathy circuit is localized in certain areas of the brain. We know that its lack of empathy is highly correlated with some genetic variations. We know that, for instance, antisocial personality disorder or psychopathy, we know many of the risk factors of this personality type. With concentrated effort, we may be able to figure out strategies to enhance ourselves in this respect. Finally, I want to talk about a second strategy which I think perhaps is more promising. One of the problems of moral enhancement is, of course, that perhaps people don't want to be enhanced. And perhaps in enhancing people's ethics in this way, we open up for another kind of problems, namely totalitarianism. And perhaps totalitarianism is more dangerous, or perhaps enhances these other threats more. So, well, that's the reason I'm a bit skeptical about moral enhancement. The other is about building redundancy. And space colonization is, of course, a big dream of all sci-fi fans. But actually, in order to mitigate existential risks and global catastrophes, it's pretty good. It's very unlikely that 2 planets will be struck by a meteor or an asteroid. If there's a bioengineered infectious agent, distances between planets could make it easier to quarantine a planet, even if one was struck by disease. Also, nuclear holocaust is also nuclear war between planets is very difficult, especially since you can kind of know about the missile long before it strikes you, and you can kind of devise some kind of countermeasure. Artificial intelligence, well, that's still a problem. But still, if you build bases in other planets, you're kind of hedging your bets against certain kinds of disasters, which is pretty good. Of course, the costs are astronomical, no pun intended. But considering this argument, perhaps they're less astronomical than we would normally think about it in normal economic terms. Normal economy takes the current GDP of the world, calculates the cost and says, oh no, this is too expensive. But if we take into account the millions of life that we may save by colonizing other planets, then perhaps it makes sense. So that's one idea. Another idea, which perhaps only will help us with this kind of problems, is uplifting of non-human animals. The idea of uplifting consists in genetically engineering or by other means enhancing the intelligence of non-human animals in order for them to participate in our civilization as citizens. The main advantages, I believe, with this approach is that it's in itself beneficial, I believe. Especially great apes live in utter poverty and destitution. They are either incarcerated in zoos around the world and subjected to cruel treatments in laboratories and are subjected to the constant threat of predation, rape, murder, and starvation, and of course infectious disease in the wilderness. Being a chimp is not fun under normal circumstances. So I think in a sense we have a moral duty to help them be uplifted to our standards of living. But I also think that there may be advantages when it comes to existential risks. It is unlikely that a virus that readily infects people to be as proficient in infecting non-human animals. It's also that if we believe that diversity in the members of a community helps to make this community more resilient, including non-human animals in our communities will greatly improve this resilience. Of course, chimps are just an example, and perhaps not the optimal ones. Think about these agents. A lot of infectious agents that afflict people do also afflict chimps. Perhaps dolphins is another possibility, or other great apes, and even perhaps elephants. Who knows? So I have 1 minute left. So if you have any questions? Okay. So if you want to know more about these issues, I recommend you my blog or the blog of my organization. We're a transhumanist organization that promotes discussions on these issues. Människaplus.org, or our international site Humanity Plus. My name is Karim Jebari, and this is my mail address. You can also check this speech and other speeches at vimeo.com. Thank you very much.